He had everything: money, power, and luxury, until an accident left him confined to a wheelchair and alone in his own mansion. It was then that a simple caregiver entered his life, bringing light to the dark corridors and hope to a heart in ruins. Between pain, fragility, and gestures of tenderness, a love capable of challenging the past and healing deep wounds was born. Get ready. Subscribe to the channel, leave your like, and tell us in the comments where you're watching from. The Chinese porcelain cup shattered on the marble floor, spilling the dark, steaming liquid over the pair of Italian shoes that cost more than 3 months of her salary. Silence took over the elegant cafe in the business center as if time had frozen. Robert Mitchell observed the dark stain spreading across his white linen shirt, the one his personal tailor had delivered the previous morning. His eyes, cold as the steel of his skyscrapers, rose slowly to meet the terrified face of the young waitress. I'm sorry, sir. It was an accident. I tripped and... Emily stuttered, trembling hands trying to clean the damage with paper napkins, awkwardly rubbing the expensive fabric, making everything even worse. Robert remained motionless, mentally calculating the cost of that accident, not just the ruined shirt, but the precious minutes he would lose changing clothes before the meeting with Japanese investors. Time for him was the most valuable asset, and that girl had just stolen a few minutes from him. "Stop," he ordered, his voice low and controlled, more frightening than if he had shouted. Emily froze, brown eyes wide like those of a cornered animal. She swallowed hard, aware of the stares from all the cafe customers, mostly executives who worked in the corporate buildings around them, people who could make her boss fire her in the blink of an eye. "I'll pay for the shirt, sir," she offered in an almost inaudible voice, knowing it would be impossible, but determined to take responsibility. "I can pay in installments if you allow." An ironic smile formed on Robert's perfectly sculpted lips. "And how much do you think it costs?" Emily looked down at the badge she wore on her simple cafe uniform. "Emily Adams, server. A common name, an insignificant position. Not in his universe. I don't know, sir. Maybe $200, she risked, knowing it probably cost much more. Robert let out a dry, humorless laugh. 3,000, to be exact. Her face paled. It was more than her monthly salary. That man casually wore on his body more money than she earned with an entire month of hard work. The injustice of it hit her like a slap. "I'll pay," she reaffirmed, raising her chin with a dignity Robert didn't expect. "Give me your card, please." It was then that something unexpected happened. As she continued trying to clean the stain, Robert held her wrists to stop her. The touch was electrifying. A sudden current ran through both their bodies, creating an invisible connection that neither was prepared to feel. For a fleeting instant, time really did stop. The buzz of the cafe the curious stares dissipated. Only the two of them remained, connected by that simple touch of skin. Her brown eyes, honest and transparent, met his blue ones, habitually cold, but now with a different, almost curious glow. Robert felt something strange in his chest, a jolt he couldn't explain. Without thinking, he pulled her closer, in a movement that surprised them both. She, disconcerted, fell against his chest, and he, in an impulse he could never explain afterward, embraced her. It wasn't an ordinary embrace. It was a meeting of completely opposite worlds. He, with his French cologne that cost a fortune, she with the aroma of coffee and cinnamon permeating her uniform. He, the man who had built an empire avoiding emotional connections. She, the young woman who survived by building bridges with each person she served. For 3, maybe 4 seconds, they remained like this, in an embrace that defied all logic. The customers around watched in astonishment. The cafe manager, at the counter, swallowed hard.
Fearing to lose the entire establishment, everyone knew who Robert Mitchell was, the ruthless real estate magnate.
Owner of half the commercial buildings in New York. "I'm sorry," she whispered against his chest, feeling the man's heart beating rapidly, betraying the controlled expression he always displayed. Robert released her abruptly, as if waking from a trance. He looked around at the surprised faces and felt something he rarely experienced: embarrassment. He, who commanded boardrooms with hundreds of executives who closed billion-dollar deals without blinking, felt exposed and vulnerable. "It's fine," he said, his voice regaining its usual cold tone. "Accidents happen." But something had changed. The look they exchanged had weight. Robert straightened his tie, trying to recover his composure. "I need to go." "I have a meeting." "But your shirt," she began. "I have others," he cut her off, taking out his wallet and leaving a $100 bill on the table, much more than the coffee cost. An automatic gesture, from someone who uses money to end conversations. Robert left the cafe with long strides, heading to the car where his driver was waiting. Inside the armored vehicle, he looked at the coffee stains spreading across his shirt and, for the first time in a long time, smiled without knowing exactly why. Emily watched through the cafe window as the black Maybach disappeared among the other cars. Her hands were still trembling, not just from the fear of losing her job, but from something deeper she couldn't name. That embrace had been so unexpected, so out of context, and yet so necessary. "Emily!" The shrill voice of her supervisor brought her back to reality. "What was that? Do you have any idea who that man is?" She nodded, still dazed. "Yes, I do. Robert Mitchell, the owner of half this city. And you spilled coffee on him." The man ran his hands through his thinning hair, desperate. "We're finished. He's going to close the cafe, I'm sure. He said it was okay," Emily defended herself. "Collecting the broken pieces of the cup. Men like him don't say what they really think," retorted the supervisor.
They act.
"And when they act, we, common people, suffer the consequences." Emily didn't respond. In her mind, she replayed the moment of the embrace, that suspended instant in time when she felt something different emanating from that supposedly cold and calculating man. For a second, she felt she had touched a real person beneath the millionaire's armor. Meanwhile, in the luxurious car gliding through the congested streets, Robert Mitchell looked out the window without really seeing the city. His mind was fixed on that unexpected moment, on the aroma of vanilla and cinnamon emanating from her hair, on the strange sensation the embrace had provoked. A sensation he hadn't experienced since, well, perhaps never. "Need to stop at the apartment to change clothes, sir?" asked the driver, looking in the rearview mirror. Robert hesitated, something rare in his routine of quick and precise decisions. "No, let's go straight to the office. I have shirts there." The driver nodded, surprised at the decision. Normally, Robert wouldn't tolerate even a simple stain on his impeccable clothes. Upon arriving at the immense mirrored building that housed the headquarters of Mitchell Enterprises, Robert went directly to his office on the top floor. He ignored the curious glances from employees at his stained shirt and locked himself in his office. Instead of immediately changing clothes, as would be logical, he approached the panoramic window that offered a complete view of the city he had helped build. Down below, small as an anthill, was the cafe where that strange encounter had occurred. Robert wondered for the first time in a long time about the life of someone other than himself. Who was that girl? What had led her to work at that cafe? How would it be to live on a salary that barely paid for one of his shirts? The phone rang, bringing him back to reality. "Mr. Mitchell, the Japanese investors are waiting in the conference room," his secretary informed. Robert took a deep breath. "Tell them I'll be there in 5 minutes. Finally, he changed the stained shirt for a new one, perfectly identical to the previous one. He adjusted his tie, checked his appearance in the mirror, and resumed the cold and calculating expression everyone expected from him. But while walking to the meeting that could yield millions for his company, a part of his mind remained in that cafe, caught in an embrace that shouldn't have happened. Emily finished her shift exhausted, physically and emotionally. The incident with the millionaire had left everyone at the cafe agitated, and her supervisor wouldn't stop reprimanding her about what had happened. At the end of the day, he called her to the cramped office in the back of the establishment. "I got lucky. Mr. Mitchell didn't call demanding your dismissal," he said, seeming genuinely surprised. "But consider yourself warned. One more slip-up and you're out. We can't afford to irritate people like him." Emily nodded, grateful to keep the job she so desperately needed to pay for college. She left the cafe when it was already dark, taking the crowded bus to the small apartment she shared with 2 university colleagues. Upon arriving home, she threw herself on the tiny bed, still dressed, and closed her eyes. Against her will, the image of the blue-eyed man with the imposing presence returned to her mind. There was something about him, something beyond the obvious wealth and intimidating power, something deeply lonely. "How silly," she murmured to herself. "Men like him don't know loneliness, they only know power." The next day, she woke up early to attend business administration classes before her shift at the cafe. During the lecture on strategic management, the professor mentioned Robert Mitchell as an example of a visionary entrepreneur who had transformed the country's real estate market. Emily smiled ironically. If the professor knew that, less than 24 hours earlier, she had spilled coffee on that example of success. When she arrived at the cafe for her shift, she immediately noticed something was different. There was an atmosphere of tension in the air, and the employees were whispering among themselves, casting glances in her direction. "What happened?" she asked a colleague while putting on her apron. "He's here," the girl whispered, discreetly pointing to a table in the corner. "And he specifically asked for you." Emily felt her heart race when she saw Robert Mitchell sitting alone at a secluded table. wearing an impeccable navy blue suit, checking his wristwatch that probably cost more than a popular car. His eyes met hers across the room, and an almost imperceptible smile appeared on his lips. "Go there," insisted the supervisor, suddenly appearing at her side. He's been waiting for 20 minutes and refused to be served by anyone else. With trembling legs, Emily crossed the cafe, aware that everyone was watching. As she approached the table, she noticed he had closed his laptop and put away his phone, a rare gesture for someone of his position. "Good morning," she said, trying to keep her voice steady. "How can I help you?" Robert stared at her for a moment too long, as if trying to decipher a complex code. "A coffee, black, no sugar." Emily wrote down the simple order, waiting for him to add something else, perhaps an explanation for his presence or a mention of the previous day's incident. But he just continued to observe her, with those eyes that seemed to see beyond the surface. "Anything else, sir?" she asked, uncomfortable with the silence. "Yes," he finally answered. "Be careful when serving this time. This shirt is even more expensive than the previous one." There was a different tone in his voice, not of reproach, but almost playful. Emily couldn't help a small smile. "I'll do my best, sir, but I can't promise anything. Sometimes accidents are necessary." Robert raised an eyebrow, clearly not accustomed to challenging responses. "Necessary?" he repeated, intrigued. "Yes, they take us out of our routine. Make us feel something different, even if just for a moment." She didn't know where this courage came from, but the words flowed naturally. "Interesting theory," he commented, leaning back in his chair. "And what do you think yesterday's accident made me feel?" Emily hesitated, aware of the sudden intimacy of that conversation. "I don't know," she answered honestly. "But I think it was something you don't feel often." Robert leaned slightly forward, lowering his voice. "And what did you feel, Emily Adams?" Hearing her full name on his lips caused a strange sensation in her stomach. How did he know her last name? She looked instinctively at her badge, which showed only Emily. "I researched you," he explained, noticing her confusion. "I'm a curious man, and I'm a simple cafe server," she responded, regaining her composure. "There's not much to know." "I disagree. There's always much to discover about people, especially those who surprise us." Emily felt her cheeks warming. "I'll get your coffee, sir." She walked away quickly, her heart beating out of rhythm. In the staff area, she took several deep breaths, trying to understand what was happening. Why would a man like Robert Mitchell be interested in an ordinary girl like her? Was it some kind of perverse game? An elaborate revenge for the spilled coffee? When she returned with the order, she carefully placed the cup on the table, determined not to make the same mistake. "Business administration student at State University," Robert commented casually as he took the cup. "Third year, excellent grades despite the double journey of work and study. Lost your father at 12. Partially supports your sick mother in the countryside. Ambitious, dedicated, resilient." Emily froze, astonished by the amount of information he had collected about her in less than 24 hours. "How did you—" she began, but was interrupted. "I have resources," he answered simply. "And as I said, I was curious." "That's invasion of privacy," she retorted, feeling a mixture of fear and indignation. Robert took a sip of coffee, showing no remorse. "It's research. I do this with all my potential investments." "I'm not for sale, Mr. Mitchell," Emily responded firmly, though her voice trembled slightly. A genuine smile illuminated his face for the first time. "I'm not trying to buy you, Emily. I'm trying to understand what happened yesterday." "What happened was an accident. I spilled coffee on you. You reacted unexpectedly, and now you're here. For some reason I can't comprehend." Robert placed the cup on the table and looked at her intensely. "In that fraction of a second when we touched, you felt something different, didn't you?" The question caught her off guard. Could it be possible that a man like him, known for his coldness in business and relationships, had been affected by that moment as much as she had? "Maybe," she finally admitted, "but it doesn't mean anything. We're from completely different worlds." "Worlds can collide," he responded enigmatically. "And when they collide, they rarely remain the same." Before Emily could respond, his cell phone rang. Robert looked at the screen with irritation but answered, instantly returning to the ruthless executive mode. The transformation was impressive. His posture, voice, and expression changed completely in seconds. "I'm on my way," he said coldly, ending the call. He stood up, leaving another $100 bill on the table again. "The coffee was excellent. Thank you." And just as he had arrived, he left, leaving Emily with more questions than answers, and a disturbing sensation that her life was about to change in ways she couldn't predict. During the following week, Robert returned to the cafe every day, always at the same time, always ordering the same black coffee, always requesting to be served by Emily. The visits were brief, rarely lasting more than 15 minutes, but intense. They talked about seemingly trivial subjects, the weather, daily news, the cafe traffic, but behind these superficial conversations, something deeper was developing. Emily discovered that Robert was not just the ruthless magnate portrayed in business magazines. There was in him a sharp intelligence, a dry sense of humor that few perceived, and a genuine curiosity about the world around him, a world that, by his own choice, he observed only from a distance. Robert, in turn, found in Emily something he hadn't experienced in a long time: authenticity. She didn't try to impress him, didn't flatter, didn't measure each word out of fear or interest. On the contrary, she challenged him, questioned his certainties, made him see things from perspectives he had never considered. On Monday of the following week, when Emily approached to serve him, Robert surprised her with an unexpected invitation. "Have dinner with me tonight," he said. Without beating around the bush, Emily blinked, astonished. "What? Dinner? Tonight? With me," he repeated, with the objectivity of someone accustomed to having his wishes fulfilled without question. "Why?" she asked, genuinely confused. The question seemed to disconcert him. "Probably no one ever questioned his invitations. Because I want to talk to you without the pressure of your work, without curious onlookers, without the time constraint," he explained, surprising himself with the honesty of the response. Emily bit her lower lip, hesitant. "I don't know if it's a good idea." "Why not?" "Because this," she gestured between them. "Whatever it is doesn't make sense. You're you, I'm me. We're from completely different realities." Robert leaned forward, eyes intensely fixed on hers. "That's exactly why I want to have dinner with you. Because you see something no one else sees. And what would that be? That behind all this empire, this success," he made quotation marks with his fingers, "there is just a man, no better or worse than any other." Emily felt her heart race. There was a vulnerability in those words that contrasted dramatically with his public image. "Where would this dinner be?" she asked, already knowing she wouldn't be able to refuse. "There's a small Italian restaurant in the old part of the city. Discreet, quiet. I can send my driver to pick you up at 8. Emily shook her head. "If I go, and I'm still not saying I will, I'll go by my own means." A smile appeared on his lips. "Independent to the end, aren't you?" "To the end?" she confirmed, returning the smile. Robert wrote down the address of the restaurant on a napkin and handed it to her along with his personal phone number. "At 8, he said, standing up. "And come as you are, Emily. Don't try to fit into my world. It's precisely your world that interests me." As she watched him leave the cafe, Emily felt torn between excitement and fear. That invitation could be the beginning of something special or the biggest mistake of her life. Either way, she knew there was no turning back. The spilled coffee that morning had created waves that were now turning into a complete tide, carrying her into deep and unknown waters. The restaurant was exactly as Robert had described. Small, cozy, with soft lighting and tables discreetly set apart from each other. Emily arrived 10 minutes late, having taken longer than expected to choose what to wear. She had opted for a simple but elegant dress, the best she had in her modest wardrobe, and tied her hair in an unpretentious bun. Robert was already waiting for her, seated at a table in the back. He wore more casual clothes than she had ever seen him wear. Dark, pants and a button-up shirt without a tie, but still, exuded a natural elegance that came less from the clothes and more from his posture and presence. When their eyes met, Emily felt that same electric current from the first day. Robert stood up, a gentlemanly gesture that seemed natural to him, and pulled out the chair for her to sit. "I thought maybe you wouldn't come," he commented, returning to his place. "I thought so too," she admitted with a nervous smile. "I changed my mind about 5 times on the way. And what made you decide to come after all?" Emily pondered for a moment. "Curiosity, maybe. Or perhaps the feeling that I would regret it if I didn't come." Robert nodded, understanding. "Regrets are worse than mistakes. Mistakes teach. Regrets only torment." A waiter approached, serving them water and delivering the menus. Emily opened hers and immediately felt a tightness in her stomach. There were no prices listed, a clear sign that it was a place far too expensive for her budget. "Order whatever you want," Robert said, noticing her discomfort. "Chef Anthony makes the best mushroom risotto in the city. Do you come here often?" she asked, trying to ignore the insecurity. "Not as much as I'd like. It's one of the few places where I'm not Robert Mitchell, the businessman, just a customer like any other." Emily smiled. "I find it hard to believe that anywhere you're just a customer like any other. Maybe that's why I like it here. Anthony cares more about the quality of his dishes than who consumes them. Once he refused to change a recipe that I suggested. Said I could buy the entire restaurant, but his grandmother's recipe was sacred." Emily's spontaneous laughter lit up her face. "And what did you do?" apologized and accepted the dish as he prepared it. It was a lesson in humility. "I imagine you don't receive many of those." "Not as many as I should," he admitted, surprising her with his frankness. When the waiter returned, Robert ordered wine and suggested dishes that Emily had never tried before. The meal proceeded in a surprisingly easy conversation. They talked about her college, about his projects, about books, movies, and places they would like to visit. With each word exchanged, each smile shared, the distance between their worlds seemed to diminish. "How did you become you?" Emily asked after a sip of wine, the question escaping before she could contain it. Robert raised his eyebrows. "What do you mean?" "This man?" She vaguely gestured in his direction. "Powerful, controlled, always distant." "How did that happen?" For a moment, the mask of the ruthless executive returned to his face, and Emily feared she had crossed a line. But then, his shoulders relaxed, and he twirled the wine glass between his fingers, contemplative. "I grew up watching my father build and lose fortunes," he began, his voice softer than usual. "He was brilliant in business, but terrible in relationships. Married 4 times, each divorce more expensive and painful than the previous one. In the end, he died alone, consumed by bitterness and regrets." Emily listened attentively, realizing that few had the privilege of hearing this story. "My mother, his second wife, used to say that he confused love with possession, that he never understood the difference between possessing and belonging." Robert paused, as if carefully choosing his next words. "I decided early on that I wouldn't make the same mistakes. If I couldn't learn to love correctly, then I wouldn't love at all." "And did that work?" she asked softly. Their gazes met across the table, the question hovering between them like an unspoken promise. "Until now, yes," he answered, leaving the implication of "until now" suspended in the air. After dinner, they walked side by side along the cobblestone streets of the old district. The night was mild, with a gentle breeze that stirred Emily's hair, now loose from the bun. Robert maintained a respectful distance, but Emily could feel the growing tension between them. "Why did you come back to the cafe after that day?" she finally asked, stopping under the yellowed light of an old lamppost. Robert also stopped, turning to face her. The soft lighting created shadows on his face, softening his usually severe features. "Because for the first time in years, I felt something that I couldn't explain or control," he admitted, his voice low and intense. "And because, against everything I've always believed, I wanted to feel it again." The raw honesty of that confession left her speechless. They were standing so close now that she could feel the heat emanating from him, could inhale his discreet but unmistakable cologne. "And what do you feel now?" she whispered, barely recognizing her own voice. Robert raised his hand slowly, as if asking permission, and touched her face with a surprising delicacy for someone accustomed to commanding empires. "Fear," he answered sincerely. "Fear that this is real, and even more fear that it isn't." Before Emily could respond, Robert's cell phone rang, breaking the spell of the moment. He closed his eyes for a second, visibly irritated by the interruption, but answered upon seeing the name on the screen. "I understand," he said, after listening for a few moments. "I'll be there in 20 minutes. When he hung up, there was a shadow of frustration on his face. "I need to go," he explained. "Crisis with a project in Singapore. The time difference sometimes complicates things." Emily nodded, trying to hide her disappointment. "Of course, I understand." "No, you don't understand," he said, taking her hands. "On any other night, with any other person, I would simply ignore the call. But we're in the middle of a negotiation that could affect hundreds of jobs." The warmth of his hands on hers was comforting and disturbing at the same time. "You don't need to explain," she replied. "It's okay. Can I see you again? Tomorrow?" The question contained an anxiety that completely contradicted the image of the self-assured man that the world knew. Emily hesitated. Part of her screamed to back away, to protect her heart from something that seemed doomed to failure. Another part, however, stronger and more insistent, was already completely involved in that unexpected connection. "Yes," she finally answered. "Tomorrow." A genuine smile illuminated Robert's face, transforming it completely. He leaned in and, with a softness that surprised her, placed a light kiss on her cheek, so close to her lips that Emily felt a shiver run down her spine. "Good night." "Emily Adams," he whispered near her ear before moving away. Emily remained motionless as she watched him walk to the car that was discreetly waiting for him at the end of the street. Only when the vehicle disappeared around the corner did she let out the sigh she hadn't realized she was holding. "What am I getting myself into?" she murmured to herself, touching the spot where his lips had been seconds before. The next day, Emily had difficulty concentrating in class. The previous night repeated in her mind like a film she couldn't pause. The elegant restaurant, the surprisingly natural conversation, the almost kiss under the lamplight. Everything seemed part of a dream from which she would soon awake. During her break, she checked her phone and found a message from Robert. "Dinner at 8? Same place? Or would you prefer something different?" The formality of the writing contrasted with the almost palpable expectation behind the words. Emily hesitated before responding. Something different would be good. Something that wouldn't make her feel like a foreigner in unknown territory. "How about I choose the place today?" she finally typed. Before she lost her courage, she added, "There's a place that means a lot to me. It's not sophisticated, but the food is amazing." The response came almost instantly. "Perfect. Send the address and I'll be there." The restaurant Emily chose was in a modest neighborhood, far from the refined environments that Robert frequented. It was a small family diner, with rustic wooden tables covered by checkered tablecloths, and a welcoming lighting that came mainly from candles in repurposed wine bottles. When Emily arrived, precisely at 8, she was surprised to see that Robert was already there, sitting at a corner table, looking curiously at ease in that environment so different from his world. He wore even more casual clothes than the night before. Dark jeans and a simple blue shirt that, nonetheless, she suspected cost more than her entire wardrobe. "You came," she commented, approaching with a nervous smile. Robert stood to greet her. "Of course I came. Why the surprise?" "I don't know," she shrugged, sitting down. "I thought maybe this place would be too simple for you." He looked around, observing the environment with genuine interest. "Actually, it's exactly what I needed today. I spent the entire day in sterile meeting rooms, surrounded by people who say yes to everything I say. This," he gestured to the lively restaurant, "is real." Emily felt absurdly happy with those words. "I've been coming here since childhood. The owner, Mr. Anthony, was a friend of my father's. When he passed away, Mr. Anthony would let me do homework here after school, while my mother worked. So it's a special place for you," Robert commented, observing how her eyes sparkled when speaking of those memories. "Very," she confirmed. "My father used to say that food doesn't need to be expensive to be good. It needs to be made with love." An elderly gentleman with gray hair and a white apron approached the table, his face lighting up when he saw Emily. "My girl," he exclaimed, embracing her affectionately. "How long it's been?" "Hi, Mr. Anthony," she smiled, returning the embrace. "This is my friend Robert." The old man's experienced eyes rested on Robert, evaluating him with the wisdom that only years bring. He extended his calloused hand, which contrasted with the well-cared-for hand of the businessman. "Welcome to my home," he said simply. Robert shook his hand with respect. "Thank you for having me." "Any friend of our Emily is welcome," the man replied, with a look that said much more than his words. Turning to Emily, he winked. "I'll prepare that lasagna your father loved. And the house wine, of course." When the old man walked away, Robert looked at Emily with curiosity. "Your friend?" Emily blushed slightly. "I didn't know how to introduce you. What exactly are you, Robert? My acquaintance? The guy I spilled coffee on? The millionaire who for some inexplicable reason is having dinner with me for the second night in a row?" Robert laughed, a genuine sound that Emily discovered she adored. "All of those, I suppose, but I like friend for now." "For now," she repeated, savoring the implicit promise in those words. The evening proceeded in a completely different atmosphere from the previous one. Here Robert was the foreigner, observing with fascination the familiar and welcoming environment, so distant from the starred restaurants and exclusive clubs he frequented. Emily, in turn, shone with a confidence that he had not yet seen in her. She was in her territory, surrounded by memories and affection. They ate the best lasagna Robert had ever tasted, drank red wine served in simple glasses, and talked about everything and nothing at the same time. He told about his lonely childhood and expensive boarding schools, while she spoke about growing up in a modest but love-filled home. "I knew you were rich, but I didn't imagine you were so—" She hesitated, searching for the word. "Isolated?" he completed. "I was going to say lonely," Emily gently corrected. Robert nodded, swirling the wine in his glass. "It's the price we pay for power. The higher you climb, the more rarefied the air becomes. Fewer people can breathe beside you." "It shouldn't be like that," she replied, covering his hand with hers on the table. The touch, simple and unpretentious, sent waves of warmth through Robert's body. He intertwined his fingers with hers, marveling at how their hands seemed to fit perfectly together. "No, it shouldn't," he agreed, gazing at her intensely. "Perhaps that's why I feel so alive when I'm with you. You make me breathe different air." The moment was interrupted when Mr. Anthony returned, bringing dessert, a homemade tiramisu that, he assured them, was my mama's recipe. God rest her soul. Later, Robert insisted on accompanying Emily home, despite her protests. They walked side by side through the streets of the simple neighborhood, so different from the elegant avenues where his penthouse apartment was located. "You don't need to walk me home," she said for the third time. "It's not safe for you to walk around here alone afterward." Robert laughed. "I grew up in much worse places than this, believe me. Before the money, my father dragged us through some of the most dangerous neighborhoods in the city." Emily looked at him with surprise. "You never mentioned that before." "It's not the part of my story I usually tell," he admitted. "I prefer people to believe I was born with a silver spoon in my mouth. It makes everything simpler. Why? Because when people know you've been at the bottom of the well, they expect you to be more compassionate. And I can't always be that way in business." They reached the small building where Emily lived, an old 3-story edifice, with peeling paint and a rusty fire escape on the side. She stopped at the entrance, suddenly conscious of the simplicity of her life compared to his. "This is it," she said, unnecessarily. Robert looked at the building, then at her, without any judgment in his gaze. "Thank you for bringing me to your world tonight. Thank you for wanting to know it," she replied. They stood on the sidewalk, the tension between them growing with each second. Robert stepped forward, eliminating the distance that separated them. With delicacy, he tucked a strand of her hair behind her ear, letting his hand slide down Emily's face. "May I kiss you?" he asked, his voice husky with contained desire. Emily's heart raced. "I thought men like you simply took what they wanted, not something so precious," he murmured. Emily rose on tiptoe, closing the space between them. "Yes, you may." The kiss began softly, almost reverent, his lips exploring hers with a surprising delicacy. But soon the tension accumulated in the last days exploded between them, transforming the gentle touch into something deeper, more urgent. Robert's hands embraced her waist, pulling her against him, while Emily's hands tangled in his dark hair. When they finally separated, breathless, reality seemed to have changed around them, as if that kiss had marked a point of no return. A line crossed that would make it impossible to go back to who they were before. "Good night, Emily," Robert whispered, brushing his lips against hers one last time. "Good night," she replied, reluctant to move away. As she watched Robert walk back down the street, Emily felt simultaneously the deepest happiness and the most terrible fear. She was falling in love with a man from another world, a man whose life was as distant from hers as the moon from the earth. And the most frightening thing, she suspected that he was falling in love with her too. In the following weeks, Robert and Emily created their own reality, a small universe that existed in the interstices of their very different worlds. They met almost every night, alternating between the sophisticated and retry G-continue edit in the following weeks. Robert and Emily created their own reality, a small universe that existed in the interstices of their very different worlds. They met almost every night, alternating between the sophisticated and the simple, discovering together a city that neither of them knew completely. For Robert, it was like rediscovering the world through Emily's eyes. She took him to public parks where he had never been, to small corner bookstores, to vibrant street fairs full of life. She showed him a city that pulsed beyond the meeting rooms and exclusive restaurants that made up his limited universe. For Emily, it was an opening of horizons. Robert introduced her to art exhibitions, intimate concerts, and restaurants where chefs created true culinary masterpieces. More importantly, he showed her that his world wasn't inaccessible, just different. But, as in every love story, clouds began to form on the horizon. The first came in the form of Victoria Langley, Robert's ex-fiancée and daughter of one of his main partners. Emily and Robert were leaving a street cinema, where they had watched a foreign film she loved, when they heard a feminine voice. Elegant and cutting like crystal, Robert Mitchell, so the rumors are true. They turned to find a stunning woman, impeccably dressed in a designer outfit, observing them with an expression between amused and disdainful. "Victoria," Robert responded, his posture instantly changing to that of the cold executive Emily rarely saw in recent times. "I didn't know you were back in the country." "Clearly," she smiled, her eyes evaluating Emily from head to toe. "Aren't you going to introduce me to your friend?" The way she said "friend" made Emily feel diminished, as if she were something insignificant, perhaps even shameful. "Emily, this is Victoria Langley." "Victoria, Emily Adams." Robert made the introductions briefly, the tension evident in his voice. Enchanted, Victoria extended her hand with perfectly manicured nails. "Robert and I have known each other for an eternity. Our families are practically one." "They used to be closer," Robert corrected, placing his arm protectively around Emily's waist. "How's Paris?" "Boring without you," Victoria responded, her eyes never leaving Robert's. Daddy is organizing a dinner next week to discuss the expansion in Asia. You'll come. Of course. It wasn't a question, but a statement. I'll have my secretary confirm, he responded diplomatically. Perfect. Victoria smiled, finally turning her attention to Emily. It was a pleasure to meet you, Emily. It's always interesting to meet Roberts. Passing diversions. Before Emily could respond, Victoria had already walked away, leaving behind only the expensive aroma of her French perfume and a heavy sensation in the air. Ex-fiancé? Emily asked when they were alone. Robert sighed. Yes, a relationship that made sense on paper. Two powerful families, aligned commercial interests, similar backgrounds. What happened? I realized I was repeating my father's mistakes. Marrying for convenience, not for love. Emily absorbed those words, trying to ignore Victoria's voice echoing in her mind. Passing diversions. She clearly still has feelings for you. Robert shook his head. Victoria has feelings for what I represent, not for who I am. There's a crucial difference. Although his words were reassuring, Emily couldn't completely shake off the uneasiness the encounter had provoked. It was a painful reminder that, however magical their moments together were, the real world, with all its complications and judgments, still existed out there, waiting to test them. The second cloud came a few days later, when Emily arrived at the cafe for her shift and found her supervisor waiting for her with a grave expression. We need to talk, he said, leading her to the office in the back. Emily sat down, apprehensive. Did something happen? The man placed a tablet in front of her, showing the page of an online gossip magazine. There she was, next to Robert, leaving a restaurant. The headline said, Robert Mitchell's new romance. Who is the mysterious waitress? This is everywhere, the supervisor said, sliding his finger across the screen to show other similar publications. Customers are coming here just to see you. Paparazzi are at the door. This is affecting our business, Emily. She felt the blood draining from her face. I'm sorry. I didn't imagine this would happen. Look, the man sighed. You're a good employee. Hardworking, punctual customers like you. But this, he pointed to the tablet, is bringing the wrong kind of attention to the cafe. Are you firing me? She asked, her voice almost a whisper. I'm giving you two options. Either you end things with him and everything goes back to normal, or we need to part ways. Emily felt as if she had been punched in the stomach. That's not fair. My personal life shouldn't affect my work. In an ideal world, it wouldn't, he agreed. But we don't live in an ideal world, we live in this one. And in this world, when you get involved with someone like Robert Mitchell, every aspect of your life is affected. She left the cafe that day with her mind in turmoil. She hadn't told Robert, didn't want to worry him with something she considered her problem to solve. But reality was becoming inescapable. Their relationship had consequences that went beyond their feelings. The third cloud, and perhaps the heaviest, appeared in the form of a call from Emily's mother, Mrs. Adams, who lived in the countryside and rarely interfered in her daughter's life, called on a Sunday morning, her voice trembling with concern. Emily, my child, what's happening? Martha from the bakery showed me a magazine with your photo. Are you dating a rich man? Emily closed her eyes, massaging her temples. Mom, it's complicated. Daughter, be careful. The lady's voice conveyed genuine concern. Men like that don't marry girls like us. Your grandmother always said sparrows don't mix with swallows. Mom, it's not like that. Emily tried to explain. Robert is different. They're all different until proven otherwise, my daughter. Mrs. Adams responded with the wisdom of someone who had already seen many similar stories end in tears. I just don't want you to get hurt. That night, Emily couldn't sleep. Her mother's words, added to the work ultimatum and the encounter with Victoria, formed a storm in her mind. For the first time, she allowed herself to seriously question the future of that relationship. Was she deluding herself? Was she just, as Victoria had suggested, a passing diversion for Robert? An exotic experiment, a way for him to experience a life different from his own, only to eventually return to the world of privileges and connections to which he belonged. The next morning, Robert immediately noticed something was wrong. They had arranged to have breakfast together at a French bakery he loved, and Emily arrived with deep, dark circles and a distant expression. What happened? He asked, taking her hands across the table. Emily hesitated, but decided that honesty was the only possible path. She told him about the conversation with the supervisor, about the call from her mother, about the articles in the gossip magazines. As she spoke, she watched Robert's face gradually harden, that mask of control she so detested returning to form. Why didn't you tell me before? He asked when she finished. Because they're my problems to solve. Your problems are my problems now, he responded firmly. I can easily solve this. One call to your supervisor and— No! Emily interrupted more abruptly than she intended. That's exactly what I don't want. I don't want to be someone who needs Robert Mitchell to solve her problems. I don't want special privileges or different treatment because of who I'm dating. Robert leaned back in his chair, clearly surprised by her reaction. So what do you want, Emily? The question hung between them, loaded with meanings and possibilities. She took a deep breath, searching for the right words. I want to know if this has a future, Robert. If we're just deluding ourselves, pretending we can create a world where our differences don't matter, because they do matter. To the world out there, they matter a lot. Robert was silent for a long moment, his eyes never leaving hers. When he finally spoke, his voice was loaded with emotion. You're right. Our differences matter. They matter because they are exactly what made me fall in love with you. Emily's heart raced upon hearing those words. It was the first time either of them had explicitly mentioned love. The world I built, Robert continued, is empty. Emily, it's made of appearances, of transactions, of people who are only by my side for what I can offer. You're the first person in a long time who sees me, really sees me, beyond the fortune, beyond the name, beyond the power. And that, he squeezed her hands between his, that is more valuable to me than all my businesses combined. The words were beautiful, exciting, and Emily desperately wanted to believe them. But reality still hovered between them like a shadow. And what do we do now? She asked softly. How do we live in the real world, not just in the bubble we've created? Robert smiled, that rare smile that she had learned to love. We build our own real world, one step at a time. The first step was dealing with the media. Instead of running from the paparazzi or ignoring the speculation, Robert arranged an exclusive interview with a respected journalist. They spoke openly about the relationship, about how they met, about their differences and what they had learned from each other. The resulting article was surprisingly respectful, portraying them not as an anomaly, but as a genuinely in-love couple. We're not trying to sell a fantasy, Robert explained to the journalist. We're real people, with different backgrounds, learning to build something meaningful together. Emily, sitting beside him during the interview, felt a wave of pride. It was the first time she saw Robert speaking publicly, not as the calculating businessman, but as the complex and sincere man she knew. The second step was facing Robert's social world. He invited her to the dreaded dinner at the Langley's house, where the cream of the business world would be present. Emily initially hesitated, but eventually accepted, understanding that this was a necessary trial. The Langley mansion was exactly as Emily had imagined, opulent, imposing, decorated with art pieces that probably cost more than an apartment. As she entered the hall alongside Robert, she felt the evaluative gazes, the poorly disguised whispers, the smiles that didn't reach the eyes. Victoria was there, of course stunning in a designer dress, observing them with an expression of cruel amusement. She approached when Robert briefly stepped away to greet a partner. Impressive, she commented, studying the simple but elegant dress Emily had chosen for the occasion. You're almost managing to blend in. I'm not trying to blend in, Emily responded with a calm she didn't feel. I'm just being myself, Victoria laughed, a melodious but empty sound. Darling, no one in this world is just themselves. We're all playing roles. Yours is that of the simple and authentic girl who won the millionaire's heart. It's a classic, though somewhat cliché. Emily maintained her composure, refusing to show how much those words affected her. And what's your role, Victoria? The woman's smile faltered for an instant. I'm the logical choice, the one that makes sense, the one he'll eventually realize he should have chosen from the beginning. Before Emily could respond, Robert returned, placing his arm protectively around her waist. He had observed the interaction from afar, and from the tension in his jaw, Emily realized he was furious. Victoria, he said with a coldness Emily rarely heard in his voice, I hope you're being a good hostess to my girlfriend. Always, Victoria smiled artificially. I was just telling Emily how refreshing it is to see you with someone so different from your usual circle. Robert intensified his embrace on Emily's waist. Emily isn't just different, Victoria. She's exceptional, and she's not outside my circle. She is my circle now. The rest of the evening proceeded in a palpable tension. Emily watched Robert skillfully navigate between business conversations and introductions, always keeping her by his side, always ensuring she was treated with respect. Still, she felt like an intruder in that world of unwritten codes and invisible alliances. On the way back, inside the silent car, Robert finally let the mask of control fall. I'm sorry for that, he said, running his hand through his hair in a gesture of frustration. They were rude, condescending. They were exactly as I expected, Emily replied softly. Don't worry, I survived. It shouldn't be about surviving, he retorted. You deserve more than that. You deserve respect. Emily turned to look at him directly. The only respect that matters to me is yours, Robert. The rest. Well, the rest is part of the package I chose when I fell in love with you. He looked at her, surprised and touched by those words. Do you regret it? Falling in love with you? No, she smiled, intertwining her fingers with his. But I won't lie. Sometimes I wonder if this world will ever really accept me. Robert brought her hand to his lips, kissing it softly. Then we'll build our own world. The third step came in the form of a professional decision. After weeks of pondering, Emily decided to leave her job at the cafe. Not because of pressure from the supervisor or the gossip, but because she realized it was time to move on. I have a proposal for you, Robert said when she told him her decision. They were in his apartment, an elegant duplex with a view of the Central Park of the city. The company foundation is looking for a coordinator for the university scholarship program. Emily raised her eyebrows. Are you offering me a job? I'm mentioning a position for which you would be perfect, he corrected. You understand the difficulties of students who need to work to support themselves. You know the university system from the inside. You have empathy and organization. The decision would be the committee's, not mine. Emily considered the offer. On one hand, it would be an incredible opportunity, a meaningful job, aligned with her values, that would allow her to help young people in a situation similar to hers. On the other hand, she feared being seen as someone who used the relationship to gain privileges. I'll think about it, she finally responded. That's all I ask, Robert smiled, understanding her reservations. But know that, whatever your decision, I will support it. That night, lying in Robert's arms, watching the city lights through the panoramic window, Emily reflected on the journey they had traveled since that spilled coffee. They were from such different worlds, with such distinct experiences and perspectives, and yet somehow they had found each other. What are you thinking about? Robert asked, tracing soft patterns on her arm. About how all this began, she responded. About how a simple accident changed our lives. He pulled her closer, kissing her forehead. It wasn't the accident, Emily, it was you. Your authenticity, your strength, your ability to see beyond appearances. The coffee was just the pretext that destiny found. Emily smiled against his chest. Who would have thought that the feared Robert Mitchell believes in destiny? I didn't believe, he admitted. I believed in planning, strategy, control. You taught me that some of the best things in life come precisely when we lose control. In the following weeks, they faced more challenges. Emily's mother finally met Robert during a tense Sunday lunch. But it ended with Mrs. Adams reluctantly admitting that maybe he is different after all. Robert's partners expressed concerns about his distraction with a relationship they considered inappropriate. Malicious articles appeared insinuating that Emily was a fortune hunter, or that Robert was having a midlife crisis. But for each obstacle they faced, their connection strengthened. Robert learned to value the simple things he had always ignored: home-cooked dinners, walks in the park, sincere conversations without hidden agendas. Emily gained confidence to occupy spaces she had previously considered inaccessible, without losing her essence or compromising her values. 6 months after the fateful coffee accident, Robert took Emily to a special dinner. They returned to the small Italian restaurant where they had their first official date. The same waiter welcomed them. The same cozy atmosphere enveloped them. We're back to the beginning, Emily commented with a smile, as they drank the wine Robert had chosen. Not exactly to the beginning, he corrected, his eyes shining in a way she had never seen before. We're at a completely new point in the story. After dinner, Robert suggested a walk through the old city center, following the same route they had taken that first night. The starry spring sky created the perfect setting, the cobblestone streets softly echoing with their steps. They stopped at the same spot, under the same yellowish lamppost where they had almost kissed for the first time. Robert turned to her, holding both her hands, his gaze intense and vulnerable at the same time. Emily, he began, his voice slightly trembling, something rare for a man usually so controlled. In this exact place, 6 months ago, I realized that my life would never be the same again. That something had awakened inside me that I didn't even know existed. She felt her heart race, anticipating what was coming. I spent my life believing that love was a weakness, a distraction, something that people like me couldn't afford to feel, he continued. I built an empire avoiding real connections, keeping everyone at a safe distance. Robert released one of her hands, only to take a small velvet box from his jacket pocket. Emily held her breath. And then you spilled coffee on my favorite shirt, he smiled, his eyes glistening with contained tears. And in a single moment, You knocked down all the walls I had spent decades building." He knelt before her, there on the empty street, under the soft light of the lamppost. He opened the little box, revealing a ring with a single diamond, elegant and perfect. "Emily Adams, you taught me that true power isn't in control, but in vulnerability. It's not in possessing, but in belonging. You showed me a world that I didn't know existed, a world where love isn't a weakness, but the greatest strength we can have." A tear escaped, sliding down Emily's cheek. Robert continued, his voice now firm and sure. "I know it hasn't been easy. I know we'll still face challenges. Our worlds are different, and there will always be those who try to separate us. But if I've learned anything in these 6 months, it's that together we're stronger than any obstacle." He took a deep breath, his blue eyes fixed on hers. "Emily Adams, would you do me the extraordinary honor of marrying me? Of building together a new world, our world, where differences aren't barriers but bridges?" Time seemed to freeze in that moment. Emily saw before her not just the powerful man the world knew, but the Robert that only she knew, vulnerable, sincere, capable of loving deeply despite all his fears. "Yes," she answered, her voice choked with emotion. "Yes, I want to build that world with you." Robert stood up, sliding the ring onto her finger with hands that, for the first time, weren't completely steady. He pulled her into an embrace that echoed that first unexpected contact at the cafe, but now loaded with promises and certainties. "I love you," he whispered against her hair. "More than I ever believed it was possible to love someone." "I love you too," she responded, finally allowing herself to believe that this improbable fairy tale could, indeed, have a happy ending. The wedding took place 6 months later, in a ceremony that perfectly reflected the union of their worlds. It wasn't at the most exclusive banquet hall in the city, as everyone expected, nor at a simple location as her family would have preferred. It was in the gardens of the new headquarters of the Mitchell Foundation for Education, a project that Robert had significantly expanded and that Emily now directed with passion and competence. The decoration blended the sophisticated and the simple, expensive flowers arranged in an unpretentious manner, elegant tables with lace tablecloths made by artisans from the community where Mrs. Adams had grown up. The food was a feast ranging from gourmet dishes to traditional recipes from Emily's family, including the famous lasagna from Mr. Anthony, who had insisted on preparing it personally for the occasion. The guests formed an unlikely mixture. Executives in expensive suits seated next to scholarship students from the foundation, celebrities sharing tables with Emily's former colleagues from the cafe. Victoria Langley attended, of course, as impeccable as always, but her disdainful smile had been replaced by a more reflective, almost respectful expression. The bride entered to the sound of a string quartet, but the chosen music wasn't the traditional wedding march, but a popular song that her father had loved and used to sing to her when she was a child. She wore an elegant but not ostentatious model, the kind of dress that said, "I am myself," instead of trying to fit in. Robert waited for her at the altar, his eyes shining with emotion as he watched her walk toward him. When he took her hands, he whispered just for her to hear, "You look absolutely stunning. You don't look too bad yourself," she joked, relieving the tension of the moment. The vows they exchanged were written by themselves, sincere words that spoke not just of love, but of transformation, of worlds colliding and recreating themselves, of barriers being torn down and bridges being built. "I promise to always be real with you," Emily said, her voice clear and emotional. "I promise to remind you every day that the value of things isn't always in their price. I promise to be your bridge to a simpler, more authentic world, where what matters isn't what we possess, but what we share." Robert squeezed her hands, visibly moved. "I promise to never again confuse power with happiness, or success with fulfillment. I promise to remember every day that the biggest deal of my life was that spilled coffee that brought me to you. I promise to build with you a world where our differences aren't obstacles, but the very reason why we complete each other." When the celebrant declared them husband and wife, the kiss they exchanged was more than a seal of union. It was the fulfilled promise that two worlds, apparently incompatible, could not only coexist, but create something entirely new and more beautiful. The reception that followed was a celebration not just of their love, but of the journey they had traveled. Between dances and toasts, moments of joy and emotion, Robert and Emily circulated among the guests, uniting people who would never have met were it not for them. In a quiet moment, while watching the guests having fun, Robert embraced Emily from behind, resting his chin on her shoulder. "Look what we created," he said softly. "This small universe where everyone mingles, where barriers disappear, where what matters is just what we are, not what we have. Emily leaned back against him, feeling the comforting warmth of his body. It's amazing, isn't it? How everything began with a simple accident. Robert turned her in his arms, looking deeply into her eyes. It wasn't an accident, my love. It was destiny correcting the course of my life. He kissed her then, a kiss that contained all the past they had shared and all the future they would build together. Later that night, when they danced a last slow song before departing for their honeymoon, Emily thought about how life could change in unexpected ways. Just over a year ago, she was just a student waitress struggling to survive, and he, a lonely millionaire convinced that love was a weakness. Now they were there, united not just by the feeling that had blossomed between them, but by the conviction that together they were stronger, more complete, more real. "What are you thinking about?" Robert asked, noticing her distant look. Emily smiled, that luminous smile that had melted the ice around his heart. "I'm thinking that maybe I should spill coffee on you more often." He laughed, the cheerful and carefree sound that few besides her had ever heard. "Whenever you want, my love, whenever you want." And as they twirled gently to the music, surrounded by people from all the worlds that now formed part of their common history, Emily and Robert knew they had found something rare and precious. Not just love, but the courage to let it transform them completely. The embrace that had begun as an accident in an ordinary cafe had transformed into a bond that united not just two hearts, but two entire universes. And in that space between worlds, they had discovered the most important thing of all, that true love doesn't erase our differences, but celebrates them. Doesn't diminish us, but expands us. Doesn't limit us, but frees us to be our best version. And that's how a millionaire who didn't believe in love, and a young woman who never expected to find it proved that. Sometimes the most improbable fairy tales are precisely the truest ones. Because real love isn't perfect like in the movies. It's imperfect, challenging, sometimes frightening. But it's precisely that imperfection that makes it so powerful, so transformative, so real. "Ready for our next adventure?" Robert whispered, as the music came to an end. Emily looked at the man who had knocked down all her certainties, who had proved that the most insurmountable barriers can be just illusions, who had chosen love above all else. "With you?" she smiled, rising to kiss him. "Always." And as they left the party hand in hand, ready to begin the next chapter of their improbable story, both carried the certainty that, however different their worlds of origin were, the world they were building together was exactly where they should be. And all because, on an ordinary morning, coffee was spilled, an embrace happened, and two hearts that didn't even know they were looking for each other finally found each other. If this story touched your heart, share it. True love, the kind that overcomes differences and transforms lives, deserves to be told.